Her smile didn't waver. Rules are rules. They exist for a reason. If we make exceptions for one person, the whole system falls apart. Do you really believe that? I asked. Her eyes flickered just for a second, revealing something colder underneath. I believe in order, she said simply, and I will maintain it. She closed the door, and I stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of what she meant. It wasn't about grass. It wasn't about paint. It was about power. Over the next few weeks, the notes kept coming. The fines piled up, $50 here, $100 there. Then came an official letter demanding payment. I tried to dispute it, but the appeals process was just another trap. Every complaint went straight back to the same people who issued the fines in the first place. That's when I realized how trapped I really was. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Kids stopped riding their bikes past my driveway. Jerry started leaving his porch light on all night, aimed directly at my yard, as if to remind me he was watching. And then came the meeting that changed everything. Linda stood in front of the group, binder in hand, announcing new policy updates. One of them, she said, was due to repeated non-compliance from certain residents. She didn't say my name, but every eye in the room turned toward me. That's when I knew this wasn't just enforcement anymore. It was personal, a test, a power play. The first real war between me and the HOA had begun, and none of us knew just how far it would go before it was over. It started slowly. Like most wars, it didn't begin with an explosion but a whisper. The quiet sound of paper sliding into a mailbox. Another letter. Another beige envelope with that embossed Meadowbrook estate seal in gold, as if they were announcing a royal decree. At first, I didn't open it. I just stood there on my porch, the evening sun heavy on my shoulders, staring at that envelope like it was a snake waiting to strike. I knew what was inside. It wasn't a welcome note. It wasn't a community event flyer. It was another fine, another accusation, another reminder that in Meadowbrook, peace was conditional, and I'd already failed the test. When I finally tore it open, the words were as sharp as ever. Violation, decorative elements not in compliance with Article 6, Section C, unauthorized lawn ornament. A lawn ornament. It took me a few seconds to even understand what they meant. Then I realized they were talking about the small bird bath I'd placed near my porch. It wasn't even new. It had come with the house, a simple concrete basin with a few chips on the edge. But apparently it didn't match community uniformity standards. I laughed out loud, standing there with the letter in my hand. The absurdity was starting to feel personal, like someone was sitting in a dark room flipping through the bylaws just to find new ways to make my life miserable. That night, I wrote my first appeal, a calm, polite letter citing the exact section of the bylaws that said bird baths were allowed as long as they didn't exceed 3 feet in height. I even attached a photo of mine, ruler included. It felt ridiculous, but I did it anyway. A week later, I got my reply, a form letter signed by Linda herself. Appeal denied. Structure not consistent with approved aesthetic. No explanation, no logic. Just power dressed up as procedure. That was when I started to notice how far the rot went. I began keeping a notebook, jotting down every incident, every note, every fine, every time I caught someone lingering near my property, because they were watching. Oh, they were watching. I'd see it during the day. A car slowing down in front of my house, someone holding up their phone as if pretending to check directions, but the lens was always angled toward me. At night, porch lights flickered on when I stepped outside. Curtains twitched. Even the motion lights across the street started reacting to my movements, as if the whole block had decided I was the entertainment. Then, one afternoon, I came home from work to find a man standing in my yard. He wore a neon vest with Property Standards Committee written across the back, clipboard in hand. I didn't even know we had a Property Standards Committee. Can I help you? I asked. He didn't look up from his clipboard. Routine inspection. For what? He flipped a page. Neighbor complaint. Overgrowth near the perimeter. I looked where he was pointing. It was one stray branch, one single vine from my jasmine plant creeping toward the fence. Are you kidding me? I said. He finally looked up, expression flat, robotic. Just doing my job. I wanted to argue, to demand he leave, but I stopped. Because as absurd as it was, he was documenting everything. Every word, every reaction. I realized then that was the point. They wanted me angry. They wanted me to snap, to give them a reason to escalate. The next letter came 3 days later. Warning: hostile behavior toward HOA representative. Continued aggression may result in community safety review. Aggression. For asking a question on my own property, that was the moment I started losing sleep. Every noise outside made me tense. A car door, a dog bark, even the wind brushing through the hedges. I'd look out the window and swear I saw someone standing across the street, but by the time I blinked, they were gone. Then came the landscaping fines. Linda sent a friendly reminder that my grass must be kept between 1.5 and 2 inches in height. A week later, I got another letter claiming it was visibly inconsistent with community standards. I measured it myself. It was exactly 1.8 inches, so I mowed again. The next day, a new notice appeared: excessive mowing activity causing noise disturbance. Please restrict yard maintenance to approved hours. I laughed until I almost cried. I was being fined for following the rules, but then something strange started happening. My trash bins were being moved. Not far, just enough to be visible from the street, enough to trigger another violation. I'd take them back behind the fence, and the next morning they'd be out again. It was deliberate. Someone was doing it. The night I decided to set up a camera, my motion lights suddenly stopped working. Both of them. At the same time, I replaced the bulbs the next day. That night, they failed again. That was when I realized this wasn't incompetence. It was coordination. Someone was helping Linda, someone close. And I had my first guess. Jerry. The man had been quieter lately, but there was something smug in his silence. He stopped waving, stopped talking. But I'd catch him standing on his porch in the evenings, just staring, like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. So, one night, I decided to give him a show. I went out to water my plants around 9 p.m., a perfectly legal activity. I took my time, dragging the hose across the yard, humming to myself. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, a car rolled up slowly and stopped at the end of my driveway. The window lowered. A phone camera glinted in the dark. I waved. The car sped off. The next morning, there was another beige envelope waiting. Violation: watering outside approved hours. I stood there in my pajamas, letter in hand, laughing like a madman. They'd crossed the line from strict to ridiculous. And something inside me, something I didn't know I still had, started to harden, but then they went after my mailbox. A letter arrived, claiming it was unapproved style and material. I checked the bylaws. Nothing about mailbox style. I called the HOA office and asked for clarification. The woman on the phone hesitated, then whispered, "I'd just replace it, sir. It's easier." That's when I realized even the HOA's own staff were scared. I replaced it anyway, identical model, different color, black instead of bronze. 2 days later, violation, mailbox color, not an approved pallet. That night, I found Jerry at his fence, leaning on the post, beer in hand. He smiled slow and mean. "Tough luck with the mailbox," he said. "Should have checked with Linda first." "How'd you know about that?" I asked. He shrugged. "We all talk." "We?" He smirked. "Neighbors, concerned citizens. We like to keep our community nice." The way he said nice made my skin crawl. It wasn't about the mailbox. It was about submission, about proving they could make me dance to their tune. So I stopped dancing. I started researching. I spent hours reading every bylaw, every amendment, every footnote. I highlighted sections, marked contradictions, built a file. If they wanted a war of paper, I'd bring a damn archive. That's when I found it, buried deep in the bylaws. An old clause about environmental preservation exemptions. It stated that homeowners who implemented eco-friendly or water conservation landscaping were exempt from standard aesthetic restrictions. It was vague, but it was there, and that gave me an idea. I began tearing out my grass. Not all at once, obviously, carefully. I replaced it with native plants, drought-resistant shrubs, and gravel pathways. I documented everything, every step, citing the exemption clause. Within a week, the neighborhood was in uproar. I'd hear whispers when I walked outside. People slowing down to stare. Someone even left an anonymous note on my car windshield. You're ruining the look of our street." Then Linda showed up. She didn't knock. Just appeared at the edge of my driveway one morning, arms folded, visor gleaming. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she asked. "I'm conserving water," I said. "Section 8B, exemption for sustainable landscaping." Her jaw tightened. "That clause is outdated." "Still in print," I said. "Still binding." She stared at me for a long moment, her smile returning, but this time it was colder. "You're making a mistake," she said, and then she left. 2 days later, I got a notice of violation. Landscaping inconsistent with community standard. Fine, $750, I appealed. They denied it. I resubmitted citing state environmental regulations. They ignored it. Then they started weaponizing the neighborhood. Suddenly, I was getting noise complaints from multiple houses. I didn't play music. I didn't have parties. I worked. I came home. I watered plants. Still the letters came. Alleged disturbances. Community discomfort. Hostile conduct. When I tried to attend the next HOA meeting to defend myself, Linda refused to recognize me on the floor. "You're not on the agenda," she said, smiling as she slammed her gavel. That's when I saw it, the look of quiet satisfaction on her face. She enjoyed this. That night, someone slashed my hose. I didn't call the police, not yet, because deep down, I wanted to see how far they'd go. The next week, I woke up to find my garden trampled, footprints through the mulch, plants crushed, a dead bird in my bird bath, and another letter waiting on my door, yard maintenance neglected. Immediate remediation required. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was war, and I stopped playing defense. I filed complaints. To the city, to the state HOA regulatory board. I documented every interaction, every photo, every conversation. I sent copies to Linda by certified mail with signatures required. She started avoiding me after that. But the harassment didn't stop. They began targeting my finances. Late fees appeared for payments I'd already made. When I produced receipts, they claimed clerical errors. Then they threatened a lien on my property. It was absurd, all over grass, mailboxes, and plants. But by then it wasn't about rules. It was about humiliation, control, and they were determined to break me. One evening I got home to find a city vehicle parked outside. Code enforcement. 2 men with clipboards were photographing my yard. "Complaint from your HOA," one said. "Alleged environmental hazard," I laughed bitterly. "Hazard?" "It's drought-resistant landscaping." He looked uncomfortable. "We'll see what the report says." That night I sat on my porch staring at my ruined plants, my mailbox, my fence, all symbols of a war I never asked for. Across the street, Linda's house glowed with perfect lighting, perfect symmetry, perfect silence, and I realized she wouldn't stop until I was gone, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She underestimated how far I was willing to go. The next morning, I started digging deeper, public records, meeting minutes, financial disclosures. That's when I found something strange. HOA funds, thousands of dollars, marked for community improvements that didn't exist. A security system upgrade that was never installed. Landscaping payments with no receipts. Linda had been using HOA money for her own property, and suddenly everything clicked. The harassment, the control, the fines. It wasn't about compliance. It was about distraction, keeping everyone too busy, too scared to notice where the money was going. That was when my fear turned into something else. Purpose. I gathered everything. Letters, photos, bank records. I reached out to other residents, the quiet ones who'd been fined into silence, and slowly, people began to talk. One couple showed me their own fines, thousands in bogus charges. Another man told me his appeals were lost 3 times before he gave up. It wasn't just me. It was systematic. I realized then that Linda wasn't just a tyrant. She was a thief, hiding behind the rules. But before I could expose her, she made her next move. A red notice, not beige this time, appeared on my door. Final warning, non-compliance will result in legal action and foreclosure proceedings. She'd gone nuclear, and standing there on my porch, the red paper trembling in my hand, I knew there was no turning back. I wasn't just fighting fines anymore. I was fighting for my home, and if Linda wanted a war, I was ready to end it. It all came to a head on a morning that felt far too calm for what was about to happen. The kind of morning where the world tricks you into believing it's just another day. Birds chirping, sprinklers ticking rhythmically across perfect lawns, the sky a flawless blue. But under that perfect surface, something was trembling. And for the first time in months, it wasn't me. I'd spent the entire night awake, surrounded by stacks of paper, letters, photos, screenshots, receipts. My living room looked like the inside of a detective's office. Evidence pinned with sticky notes, dates highlighted in red, arrows connecting names and amounts. Linda had buried her crimes under a mountain of paperwork, but I'd spent too long drowning in it not to learn how to dig back. The final piece came at 2:17 a.m., an email thread between Linda and the landscaping contractor, attached to a digital invoice marked paid. The problem? The same invoice appeared again a month later with the exact same total, reclassified as security maintenance. 2 different payments, same work. The timestamp proved it. I had her. By sunrise, I'd drafted my complaint, not to the HOA board, not even to the city. I sent it straight to the state attorney's office, with copies to every homeowner in Meadowbrook. And then I did something Linda never expected. I called for an emergency HOA meeting, citing Article 14, Section D, the one clause that allowed members to convene a vote of no confidence in the board if evidence of financial misconduct existed. It was a rule Linda herself had ignored for years. By 6 p.m., the clubhouse was full. The air was electric, tense, suffocating. People who hadn't spoken to each other in months now stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering, clutching printed copies of the email thread. The projector I'd set up flickered with the first slide. Where is our money going? When Linda entered, the room went dead silent. She wore that same pastel blazer, that same smile she always used to hide the venom. But I could see the twitch in her jaw, a tell she couldn't suppress. "Well," she said, glancing around, "I wasn't aware we were holding an official meeting tonight." "You are now," I said, standing from my seat. "Article 14. You know it, Linda." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't authorized." "It doesn't need to be," I replied, my voice steady. "The members can call it." "And we did." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few heads nodded. Someone clapped once, softly. Linda set her binder down, her movements sharp. "I see what this is," she said. "Another one of your stunts. You've been disruptive for months, harassing staff, breaking rules, spreading lies." "Then prove me wrong," I said, interrupting her. "If I'm lying, you have nothing to fear, right?" The words hung in the air. I clicked the remote, and the projector screen changed, showing 2 identical invoices side by side. Same date, same company, same dollar amount, one labeled landscaping, one labeled security. The room started buzzing. "This," I said, "is just one of 6 double-paid expenses in the past year. Over $14,000 of HOA funds, gone. And if you look closely, every one of those payments traces back to services performed on your property, Linda." She froze. "I have photos," I continued, clicking again. Images flashed up, new hedges around her yard, freshly poured concrete along her walkway, decorative lighting, all matching the improvement receipts. "That's enough," she snapped. "Those are community enhancements." "Then why were they never approved in the meeting minutes?" I asked. "Why were they paid in cash equivalents? Why did you sign both ends of the transaction?" Her face flushed crimson. "You're misrepresenting data. You don't understand accounting." "I understand theft," I said quietly. Gasps filled the room. The word hit like thunder. Jerry, sitting in the front row, suddenly pale, started to stand. Hey, let's not start throwing accusations." "Sit down, Jerry," I said. "You got your free fence from the same landscaping fund. You're not innocent either." He froze halfway up. The room erupted, voices overlapping, angry, confused. Neighbors who'd once been silent were now shouting. "Is this true?" someone demanded. "My dues went up this year. Where's that money?" "She fined me for paint color while she's stealing from us?" Linda slammed her palm on the table. "Enough! You don't understand how complex." But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. I pulled out the final document, a bank transfer log, showing the HOA's payments routed through a personal account before reaching the contractor. "Here's the thing, Linda," I said, stepping closer. You left your digital footprint everywhere. I didn't need to dig through your trash. I just needed to read your emails. And these transfers? They're time-stamped on weekends, outside HOA business hours. She tried to speak, but her voice broke halfway through. This is illegal. Exactly, I said. It is. And then I said the words I'd been waiting months to say. I've already sent everything to the Attorney General's office. And they've acknowledged receipt. Silence. Heavy, absolute. You could have heard the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, from the back of the room, someone whispered, "You mean she's under investigation?" I nodded. Linda's face collapsed, the practiced calm evaporating into raw panic. She turned to the board members beside her, but none of them met her eyes. Even the treasurer, usually glued to her side, leaned away. "You all knew," she hissed. "You knew he was unstable. You should have stopped this." "They didn't need to," I said, cutting her off. "Because the truth doesn't need permission." The crowd erupted again, this time with anger, not confusion. A wave of voices demanding her resignation, her removal, her arrest. Linda backed toward the door, trembling but defiant. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You have no idea how this works. You'll regret this, all of you." She stormed out, shoving past Jerry, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from release. Someone started clapping, then another, and then the whole room joined in. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first breath of freedom any of us had taken in a long time. When I stepped outside into the evening air, the sun was setting behind the rows of perfect houses. For the first time, they didn't look so perfect anymore. Cracks showed where the light hit them, tiny flaws that made them feel real, human. Like the illusion had finally been shattered, but the war wasn't over. 2 days later, I got the call. From a state investigator. They'd opened a formal inquiry into Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Fraud. Misuse of funds. Possible collusion. The next week, officers arrived at Linda's house with boxes and warrants. The neighborhood stood outside, pretending not to stare, but everyone watched. Even Jerry. I'll never forget the sound of that door closing behind her when they let her out. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. For months she'd used that same door to walk out and judge us all. The grass, the mailboxes, the paint colors, the lives. Now it closed on her instead. News spread fast. The local paper ran the headline, "HOA President Under Investigation for Embezzlement." The community chat lit up like wildfire. People I'd never spoken to messaged me. "You did it." "Thank you." "I wish I'd believed you sooner." And yet, even then, I didn't feel like celebrating. Because when you spend that long living under a microscope, constantly doubting yourself, victory doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like exhaustion, like quiet, like sitting on your porch at midnight, listening to the crickets and realizing nobody's watching anymore. The HOA was dismantled a month later, dissolved by majority vote. A management company took over, and the bylaws were rewritten from scratch. No more petty fines, no more surveillance, just neighbors finally acting like neighbors again. Jerry moved away. Rumor was he took a deal, immunity in exchange for testimony. Linda's trial made headlines for a while, but then faded. People moved on. But I never forgot. Sometimes I still find myself glancing out the window at night, half expecting to see someone standing there, clipboard in hand, eyes glinting behind a porch light. Old habits die hard, and yet the silence now isn't heavy anymore. It's peaceful. A few weeks after the dust settled, I found something strange in my mailbox. A small envelope, unmarked. Inside was a note written in neat cursive. "You weren't supposed to win." But you did. No signature. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was a threat or an acknowledgement. Maybe both. Either way, I smiled, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't care what the HOA thought. There was no HOA. I planted new flowers in the front yard the next morning. Bright, mismatched, defiantly colorful. The kind Linda would have hated. As I watered them, the sun came up over the rooftops, spilling gold across the cracked sidewalks and peeling fences. Meadowbrook wasn't perfect anymore, and that made it beautiful. And as the water hissed softly across the soil, I finally let myself whisper the words I'd been holding back since that first fine, that first letter, that first whisper of war. It's over. But deep down I knew stories like this never really end, because for every HOA that falls, there's another just like it, hiding behind manicured lawns and smiling committees, and somewhere someone else is checking their mailbox, holding that same beige envelope, wondering how far they'll be pushed before they finally push back. And when they do, I hope they remember my story. The silence that followed Linda's downfall was unlike anything Meadowbrook had ever known. For years, the air had been filled with her voice, clipped, precise, echoing through HOA meetings and committee announcements like a warning bell. Now, there was nothing but quiet, a heavy quiet, a healing quiet. The day after the police led her away, the entire neighborhood seemed to pause. Lawns went unmowed. The usual swarm of golf carts didn't appear on the streets. Even the sprinklers that were once programmed to start at exactly 7:30 a.m. stayed off. People didn't know whether to feel victorious or embarrassed, ashamed that it had taken them this long to see what was happening right in front of them. For me, it was surreal. I'd gone from being the pariah of Meadowbrook, the troublemaker, the complainer, the guy who couldn't just follow the rules, to being the man who brought the monster down. But victory, I learned, doesn't arrive like a celebration. It creeps in slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape scarred from a long night. You start noticing little things, the way your chest feels lighter when you check your mailbox. And don't find a warning letter, the way your neighbors finally meet your eyes again when they walk their dogs, the way you can plant a flower and not wonder if someone's going to fine you for it. The first HOA meeting after Linda's arrest was held under new leadership, a temporary board elected by the residents. This time, there were no printed rules of conduct sheets on the tables, no stack of violation slips waiting to be handed out. Instead, the tables were bare, except for a single microphone and a stack of coffee cups. When I walked in, people actually clapped. Not the sarcastic, polite kind of applause that used to echo through those meetings, but real grateful applause. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. The interim chairperson, a quiet middle-aged woman named Denise who had lived in Meadowbrook since the very beginning, stood and thanked me publicly. "We all owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling. "You were right to stand up. You were right not to stay silent." That moment hit harder than I expected, because behind her words wasn't just gratitude, it was guilt, the kind that runs deep when a community realizes how easily it let control masquerade as order. But even as the relief set in, there were still consequences waiting to unfold. Within weeks, investigators uncovered more than anyone imagined. Not only had Linda been double billing the HOA, she had funneled nearly $40,000 into personal projects over the last 3 years. Patio furniture for her own home, decorative lighting for her daughter's wedding, even maintenance on a vacation cabin 2 towns away. Jerry, her right-hand enforcer, turned out to be the key witness. He broke first, admitting to approving the false invoices in exchange for waived dues and favors. His testimony sealed her case. The news made its way through every cul-de-sac and group chat like wildfire. Linda, the woman who fined people for having mailboxes an inch too tall, was using HOA money to install granite countertops. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. When her trial began, the courthouse steps were filled with residents, not angry protesters, but quiet spectators, people who just wanted to see the end of it. Linda walked past them in handcuffs, her pastel blazers replaced by a plain gray suit. She didn't look at anyone. Inside, the prosecution laid out every transaction, every misuse of funds, every threat she'd made to silence dissent. Emails, recordings, financial statements. It was all there. And then came the video. Someone had secretly recorded one of Linda's private board meetings, the one she never documented in the minutes. The footage showed her laughing with Jerry and the treasurer, bragging about how easy it was to keep people compliant. She said, "Fear is a better motivator than fairness." When that line played in court, a gasp went through the gallery. It took the jury less than 2 hours to convict her of fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison and ordered to repay every stolen cent, plus damages. The day the verdict was announced, Meadowbrook changed forever. It started small. Someone removed the old HOA board sign from the clubhouse door and replaced it with a handwritten note, "Community meeting, everyone welcome." For the first time in a decade, that building actually felt open. The bylaws, those suffocating labyrinthine rules, were rewritten line by line. Fines were reduced, restrictions were eased, and, for once, decisions were made by votes that actually counted. People spoke without fear of punishment. There was laughter in those meetings now, genuine, unforced laughter. Disagreements still happened, sure, but they weren't battles anymore. They were conversations. As the weeks passed, neighbors started connecting in ways they hadn't before. The Smiths invited everyone over for a barbecue, something Linda would have fined them for under the noise ordinance. Kids rode bikes again without worrying about scuffing the sidewalks. Someone even started a community garden in the vacant lot Linda had once called an unauthorized project. I watched it all unfold from my front porch, sometimes still half expecting to wake up and find it was all a dream, but it was real. Slowly, the fear that had ruled this place dissolved, replaced by something we hadn't had in years, trust. And yet, as much as the neighborhood was healing, there was still a shadow left behind. The scars Linda left didn't fade overnight. People still hesitated before speaking their minds. Some still checked their mailboxes with a little spike of anxiety. It would take time, maybe years, before the ghosts of those beige envelopes stopped haunting us completely. One afternoon, Denise knocked on my door. She handed me a folder filled with documents, the HOA's dissolution papers. "We're ending it," she said simply. "No more board, no more association, just neighbors." I remember feeling something heavy lift off me, like chains unfastened, after years of carrying their weight. It was done. Officially, legally, finally done. We voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA, sell the office assets, and distribute the funds equally among the residents. What was left, the clubhouse, the lawns, the maintenance, would now be managed collectively. Not through fines and fear, but through cooperation. For the first time, Meadowbrook felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. In the weeks that followed, the change became visible. Literally. The uniform beige fences, painted over in different colors. The manicured lawns, some replaced with wildflowers, vegetable gardens, little patches of individuality. It looked messy, imperfect, alive. My yard, once the battleground of so many arguments, became something of a symbol. People stopped by to chat, to ask advice, to share stories. Kids played on the edge of my driveway where the "no loitering" signs had once stood. And then one evening, as I sat outside, a small group of neighbors gathered. Denise, the Smiths, even Jerry, who'd come to apologize. He admitted he'd been afraid of Linda for years, too. Said she'd threatened to report him for tax fraud if he didn't comply. I could see the shame written all over his face. I told him the truth. I didn't hate him anymore. I couldn't. Not after everything we'd all been through together. He nodded, his voice cracking a little. "You saved this place," he said. "Even when none of us deserved it." Maybe that was true. Or maybe I was just too stubborn to let Meadowbrook crush me. Either way, it was finally over. Months passed. The trial faded from the news. New families moved in, unaware of the chaos that once consumed these quiet streets. Sometimes I'd see them planting flowers or repainting porches, blissfully unaware that their newfound freedom had been bought with years of battles. And honestly, I preferred it that way, because Meadowbrook didn't need another crusader. It needed peace. One morning, as I walked past the old HOA office, now turned into a community library, I stopped by the bulletin board where notices once threatened fines. There was a new sign posted there now, written in bright, cheerful letters. "Welcome to Meadowbrook, a community, not a committee." I stood there for a long moment, smiling. It felt poetic. When I got home, I found a letter waiting on my porch. No envelope this time. Just a folded piece of paper with a single line written across it. "Thank you for reminding us what freedom looks like." No name, no signature. Just that. I slipped it into the drawer of my desk, in the same one that used to hold all my violation notices. Funny how things come full circle. As the months rolled on, life settled into something normal, peaceful even. I rebuilt my garden, painted my fence, fixed the porch swing Linda had once called a structural hazard. And every time I heard that faint creak as I sat down, it felt like a victory lap. The night Linda was sentenced, I'd stayed up late thinking about everything that had happened. All the fear, the humiliation, the fights. For so long, I'd thought revenge would be the sweetest ending. That seeing her punished would make it all worth it. But I was wrong. The real victory wasn't Linda's downfall. It was seeing people find their voices again, watching a neighborhood heal, watching fear turn into laughter and control turn into connection. Sometimes I think about what Linda might be doing now, sitting in a cell replaying her empire collapsing piece by piece. Maybe she blames me. Maybe she still thinks she was right. But it doesn't matter anymore, because every time I walk outside and see kids drawing chalk art on the sidewalks, something she used to fine people for, I know she lost something bigger than power. She lost relevance. The grass still grows unevenly. The fences don't match. The lawns aren't perfect. And somehow, that imperfection feels like the most beautiful thing in the world. I still get letters sometimes from people across the state, even across the country. They've seen the story online. They write to tell me about their own HOAs, their own Lindas, their own battles. They say my story gave them courage, and that, more than anything, feels like justice, because if my fight taught anyone else to stand up, to speak, to refuse to be bullied in their own home, then it was all worth it. Meadowbrook isn't a place of fear anymore. It's a place of second chances, as I sit on my porch, watching the sunset spill across those imperfect houses. I think about how strange it is, how something so ugly, so painful, can still lead to something better. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, and in that quiet, peaceful evening air, I can finally breathe again. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's freedom. And as the last light fades over Meadowbrook, I can't help but wonder how many other neighborhoods are still living under fear, waiting for someone to stand up and say, "Enough?" Maybe one day someone will. Until then, I'll be here, sitting on this porch, watching the flowers grow wild, and remembering how it feels to finally be free. I never thought the sound of a lawnmower could make my blood run cold. But that's exactly what happened the morning I found the HOA president standing in my yard, clipboard in hand, taking pictures like a crime scene investigator. It wasn't the first time she'd been there, but something about that day, the way she smiled when she saw me watching from the window, told me things were about to spiral out of control. I didn't know it yet, but that single morning would mark the beginning of the worst months of my life. At first, it all seemed harmless enough, petty even. A warning notice for the height of my hedges, a letter about the unsightly color of my garden shed, a fine for leaving my garbage bin out too long. Small things, things you'd think normal people could talk through. But that's not how it works in this neighborhood. Not in Meadowbrook Estates. Here, rules are more sacred than decency and power. Well, power is everything. The neighbors were always watching, curtains shifting, doors cracking open whenever I stepped outside. The whispers started soon after. He's not following the bylaws. He's ruining the neighborhood's image. You could feel the judgment in the air, like humidity before a storm. Every glance carried accusation. Every silence had meaning. Then came the letter that changed everything, hand-delivered, not mailed. It wasn't a warning this time. It was a threat A list of violations so absurd it almost felt like a prank. Only it wasn't. And what scared me most wasn't the list. It was the line at the bottom. Failure to comply will result in legal action and community intervention. That's when I realized this wasn't about grass height or paint color anymore. This was personal. And the more I pushed back, the more they pushed harder. Fines turned into hearings. Hearings turned into threats. And what started as a dispute over landscaping became a battle for control of my home, my peace, and my sanity. But before it was over, secrets would come out. Friendships would break. And the same HOA that tried to destroy me would face something they never expected. Consequences. So tell me, how far would you go when your home stops feeling like your own? When I first moved into Meadowbrook Estates, it felt like the kind of place you'd see on the cover of a real estate brochure. Perfect lawns, tree-lined streets, families waving as they walked their dogs in the evenings. Every house looked like it had been cloned from a single dream of suburban perfection. White fences, pastel paint, symmetrical flower beds. The air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass and lavender mulch. You could hear sprinklers ticking in unison, as if even the water here followed a schedule. I'd been searching for peace when I found Meadowbrook. After years in the city, with its noise and chaos, I wanted quiet, a place where I could wake up and hear birds instead of sirens, where neighbors said hello instead of avoiding eye contact. The house wasn't huge, but it was mine. A single-story ranch with a wraparound porch, a small workshop out back, and a yard that caught the morning light just right. I imagined coffee on the porch, evening walks under streetlights, and maybe, if I was lucky, neighbors who became friends. For the first few weeks, everything felt exactly as I'd hoped. People smiled when I passed by, waved as they trimmed their hedges or washed their cars. The HOA president, Linda Patterson, even stopped by on my second day to welcome me to the community. She handed me a thick binder full of neighborhood rules and a pie she swore she baked herself. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were sharp, calculating almost. Still, I didn't think much of it. Every neighborhood had that one person who took things a bit too seriously. Linda was in her late 50s, perfectly put together in that way only HOA presidents seemed to manage. Her hair was always in place, nails manicured, lipstick a little too red for daytime. She spoke like she was giving a speech, every sentence rehearsed and deliberate. Standing beside her that day was Greg Turner, the HOA treasurer, a retired accountant with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression that made you feel like you'd done something wrong just by existing. And then there was Marcia, the secretary, who never spoke unless Linda nodded first, like she needed permission to have opinions. At first, their involvement felt harmless. Linda would wave whenever she passed my house, sometimes stopping to chat about how lovely my azaleas looked or how neat my driveway was. She had a way of complimenting you that sounded like a warning. "It's so nice to see someone who keeps their yard in order," she'd say, glancing meaningfully toward another house down the street. It was all subtle, polite, but it carried the weight of expectation. Then there was my next-door neighbor. Jerry, early 60s, ex-military, the kind of man who mowed his lawn 3 times a week and measured the grass afterward. He was friendly enough when I first arrived, offered me a beer while he cleaned his tools. But there was something rigid about him, something that suggested his friendliness had limits. "You'll get along fine here," he told me that first week, "as long as you follow the rules. The rules." That phrase kept coming up. I didn't think much of it until I read through the HOA handbook Linda gave me. The thing was over 100 pages long, covering everything from acceptable fence heights to the exact shade of white your trim could be painted. It even had a section on how long your holiday decorations could stay up, 2 weeks after any holiday, or you'd face a fine. It was ridiculous, but at the time I laughed it off. That was before I learned how seriously they took it all. Life in Meadowbrook was curated. Every morning sprinklers hissed to life like clockwork. Joggers followed the same route, waving to the same people. Even the kids on bikes seemed to ride in formation. It wasn't creepy at first, just orderly, peaceful. But after a while, that order started to feel like control. It began with small things. A note left in my mailbox. No name, just typed words. Your trash bins were visible from the street for 3 hours after pickup. Please comply with community standards. I remember standing in my driveway holding that note, half amused, half annoyed. Someone had timed my garbage bins. I brushed it off, assuming it was a harmless reminder, but then came another note. This one about the color of my mailbox flag being too faded to match community aesthetic. Then another, complaining about excessive bird feeders attracting unwanted wildlife. I started to notice the glances, neighbors pausing as they walked by, eyes flicking over my yard, then moving on quickly. One Saturday morning, I was repainting the trim on my porch when Linda appeared, hands clasped, smile frozen in place. "Oh, hi there," she said, her voice as sweet as artificial sugar. "Just a friendly reminder, have you submitted a color approval form for that paint?" I blinked. "It's the same color it was before," she smiled tighter. "Of course. But you still need approval for any maintenance." "It's in the bylaws," I wanted to argue, but her tone left no room for it. It wasn't a conversation, it was an inspection. That was the first real crack in the illusion of Meadowbrook perfection. From then on, it felt like someone was always watching. Jerry, the neighbor, started showing up more often too. Sometimes he'd wander over just to chat, but his eyes were always darting, checking the angle of my gutters, the state of my flower beds. One afternoon, I caught him measuring the distance between my fence and the sidewalk. When I asked what he was doing, he just shrugged. "Just making sure everything's within code." Still, I tried to keep the peace. I'd moved here for calm, not conflict. I played by the rules, even when they seemed ridiculous. I went to a few HOA meetings to stay involved, but those meetings were like walking into a perfectly polite war zone. Linda sat at the head of the table like a queen at court. Greg, the treasurer, read off lists of fines and fees in his nasal, monotone voice, while Marcia took notes so fast her pen squeaked. Every meeting ended the same way, with Linda congratulating the board for maintaining our community's integrity, while everyone else sat in silent agreement. It didn't take long to realize that not everyone there was happy. There were murmurs, people who'd been fined unfairly, forced to change things that had been the same for years. But nobody spoke up, not out loud. After one meeting, I overheard a couple whispering in the parking lot. "She's gone too far this time," the woman said. The man hushed her quickly when he saw me. That was the first time I realized how much fear Linda inspired in her own neighbors. Then, one night, I came home to find a paper taped to my front door. Another notice, this one accusing me of non-compliance with landscaping standards. The issue? My grass was an inch taller than regulation height. I'd been working long hours that week and hadn't had the chance to mow. It was infuriating, but more than that, it was invasive. Someone had come onto my property to measure my grass. I remember sitting on my porch that night, staring at the notice, trying to figure out who I could have possibly offended. Then across the street I saw it, movement in a window, a curtain shifting, someone watching me. That was the moment things shifted inside me. The peace I'd been searching for, the quiet, the safety, was gone. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a stage, and the entire neighborhood was the audience. Still, I tried to reason with Linda. The next day, I stopped by her house, which looked like something out of a magazine, roses trimmed to perfect symmetry, white shutters, spotless. She opened the door with that same rehearsed smile. "Linda," I said, holding up the notice, "this is getting ridiculous. It's just grass."